Most people picture a food crisis as the moment supermarket shelves suddenly go empty, but in reality, it rarely starts that way. The early warning signs appear much sooner, while stores still look fully stocked and everything seems normal, except the food is no longer enough to truly sustain your body the way it once did. During the fertilizer shortages of 2026, rising costs forced many farmers to scale back production and reduce output wherever possible. Food did not disappear overnight. Instead, supplies gradually shrank, prices kept rising, and the nutritional quality of everyday products slowly declined week after week. This video is not about foods that simply fill you up. It is about 12 essential items that help your body keep functioning when the system around you starts to weaken. And make sure to watch until the end, because what people overlook first is often what disappears the fastest. Number 12. Potato flakes. A food that keeps working even when fuel becomes part of the problem. As fertilizer prices continue climbing through 2026 and farmers reduce how much land they can afford to plant, what we are seeing now is only the beginning stages of a much larger shift. Nitrogen fertilizer costs have already jumped roughly 30 to 40% during recent periods of instability, and that increase does not immediately show up as empty shelves in supermarkets. The first impact happens out in the fields. Then, slowly and quietly, it spreads into the choices available to ordinary people. And the first foods to become harder to find are usually not canned goods or dry staples. It is fresh produce. You may still walk into a store today and see plenty of potatoes sitting there. But as planting seasons tighten over the coming months, supply starts shrinking little by little. Yet the real issue is not simply whether potatoes remain available to buy. The more important question is something most people never stop to consider. Can you actually afford to cook them? I once heard a 62-year-old man explain it perfectly. He said, "I can still buy food, but my electricity bill climbs so fast that I've started skipping meals, not because I'm out of food, but because I don't want to switch on the stove." At first, that sounds dramatic, but when energy prices surge, every meal starts carrying an extra cost. Boiling a pot of potatoes is no longer a basic kitchen task. It becomes a calculation involving time, heat, fuel, and money. And during a crisis, those resources stop being cheap. That is the part many people miss entirely. The problem is not always a lack of food. Sometimes the real problem is losing the ability to transform that food into something edible. When gas prices rise, electricity becomes unreliable, or every unit of energy must be carefully rationed. Foods that require long cooking times slowly turn into a burden instead of a benefit. That is why potato flakes matter. Not because they are somehow superior, but because they continue working when other options become difficult. Add hot water, or even just warm water, and you instantly have something filling and usable. No large stove, no complicated preparation, and almost no extra resources required. Under normal conditions, that convenience seems minor. But when the energy system is strained, the difference becomes enormous. It can literally determine whether someone is able to prepare a meal at all. Shelf life is another reason they matter. When stored properly in a dry, sealed environment, potato flakes can last anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Fresh potatoes, on the other hand, usually survive only a few weeks before sprouting, softening, or rotting. Fresh potatoes buy you short-term comfort. Potato flakes buy you long-term control. And that difference matters more than most people realize. It is the difference between reacting to a crisis after it starts and preparing before it arrives. Storage itself is simple, but people often make one critical mistake. Potato flakes must stay dry, sealed, and protected from light, especially from moisture. The worst thing you can do is open the package and leave it near the stove or cooking area where steam builds up after every meal. Even small amounts of trapped moisture can ruin quality and dramatically reduce how long they last. Nutritionally, potato flakes are not some miracle superfood, but they do provide fast, dependable energy that helps the body continue functioning when food choices become limited and unpredictable. And financially, they make even more sense during unstable times. A serving of potato flakes costs far less than most ready-made meals, especially once prices begin climbing week after week during a prolonged crisis. This is not the kind of item you wait to buy after problems begin. It is something you already want sitting on the shelf beforehand. Because in a real crisis, the most expensive part of a meal is often not the food itself. It is the energy needed to cook it. Number 11. Egg powder. Preserving protein before it quietly disappears. A protein shortage is not something you notice right away. During the first week, everything can seem perfectly normal. You are still eating regular meals and your stomach still feels satisfied. That is exactly what makes it so easy to miss. The danger is subtle. As fertilizer costs continue rising throughout 2026, that pressure does not stop at crops. It spreads directly into animal feed. Corn and soybean prices climb, which pushes up the cost of raising chickens. And when producers face those higher costs, they cut back. That reduction does not show up as empty egg cartons overnight. Instead, the supply slowly becomes less reliable. Fresh eggs become harder to find, more expensive, and less consistently available with each passing week. And unlike a complete lack of food, a lack of protein does not stop you in your tracks. It lets you keep going, but at a cost your body quietly pays over time. At first, it feels like nothing more than extra tiredness. You notice tasks taking more out of you than usual. Then, recovery starts slowing down. Small physical efforts leave you drained longer than they should. Eventually, you realize your body is no longer responding the way it used to. Not because you are eating too little, but because what you are eating no longer provides what your body actually needs to repair and maintain itself. This is how real food crises usually unfold. Not through sudden starvation, but through gradual decline that most people fail to notice until the damage is already happening. And this is where people make a serious mistake. Carbohydrates will keep you feeling full, at least for a while. They provide immediate energy and help satisfy hunger. But protein is what allows your body to recover, rebuild, and keep functioning under long-term strain. You can survive for a short period leaning heavily on carbs. But without enough protein, your body slowly loses its ability to sustain itself. The process is not dramatic. You do not suddenly collapse. You simply weaken little by little. That is why egg powder is not just a backup substitute for fresh eggs. It is a practical way to preserve one of the most important protein sources before access becomes uncertain. When stored properly in a sealed container and protected from moisture, egg powder can remain usable for 5 to 10 years. Fresh eggs, by comparison, usually last only 3 to 5 weeks before they spoil. You may still be able to buy eggs easily right now, but there is no guarantee that stability will still exist months from now. And that difference matters. It is the difference between having a dependable source of protein already secured and gambling every week on what the market happens to provide. Storage is simple, but there is one step many people skip. Use it before you actually need it. The biggest mistake is usually not forgetting to buy egg powder. It is buying it, storing it away, and then realizing during a crisis that you have no idea how to prepare it properly. Get familiar with it while conditions are normal. Learn how it mixes, cooks, and works in recipes. That way, if the day comes when fresh eggs are no longer easy to get, it feels like a tool you already know how to use. Nutritionally, egg powder offers complete protein, which means it contains all the essential amino acids your body needs for muscle repair, endurance, and recovery during prolonged stress. That matters far more than most people realize when food choices become limited. It also offers more predictable value. Fresh egg prices can swing dramatically depending on supply issues, feed costs, and market instability. Egg powder, on the other hand, tends to provide a far more stable cost per serving over time. This is not something you rush out to buy after shelves start thinning. It is something you prepare ahead of time while choices are still wide open and prices are still manageable, because fresh eggs disappear quickly. Your body's need for protein does not. Number 10. Dried seaweed. Food that escapes the limits of the land itself. Once fertilizer becomes expensive enough, farmland stops being an advantage and starts becoming a restriction. Farmers reduce planting areas, shorten growing cycles, and slowly scale back production because the costs no longer make sense. That is when the supply chain begins tightening at the source. Most of the foods people rely on every day are tied directly to land. They depend on soil, fertilizer, weather conditions, harvest seasons, and transportation networks. But there is one category of food that has operated outside that entire cycle from the very beginning. Seaweed. No farmland, no fertilizer dependency, no traditional growing seasons. And that matters far more than most people realize. You will not see dried seaweed disappear at the same time fresh vegetables start becoming scarce, because it follows a completely different path. When crop fields struggle, the ocean still continues operating as its own ecosystem. That is the real distinction here. Seaweed is not food surviving inside the same stressed agricultural system. It exists largely outside of it. But the biggest value of seaweed is not simply that it avoids dependence on farmland. The real value is something far less obvious: trace minerals. When fresh vegetables become harder to access, the first thing you lose is usually not calories. It is not even protein at first. What quietly disappears are the smaller nutrients your body relies on to stay balanced and functioning properly. Things like iodine, zinc, magnesium, and other essential minerals. At first, you still eat enough food. Technically, your stomach is full. But your body starts feeling different in subtle ways. You become more tired than usual. You feel colder. Your energy drops. Thinking slows down. Recovery weakens. And most people never connect those symptoms to nutrition. That is how a real food crisis develops. Not always through visible starvation, but through gradual internal imbalance. Seaweed directly addresses that problem. Not because you eat huge amounts of it, but because even small portions contain extremely dense nutrition. A little goes a long way. This is not the type of food that fills your stomach. It is the type of food that quietly keeps the body's internal systems functioning over the long term. And that role becomes incredibly important during prolonged instability. In terms of storage, dried seaweed performs exceptionally well. When sealed properly and protected from moisture, it can remain usable for 5 to 10 years. Fresh vegetables, meanwhile, often begin losing quality within days. But again, the difference is bigger than shelf life alone. Fresh vegetables create a short-term feeling of freshness and health. Seaweed helps maintain deeper nutritional stability over time, especially when variety in the diet begins shrinking. Storage is simple, but moisture is the enemy. Seaweed should always be kept sealed, protected from light, and most importantly, kept dry. Once it absorbs moisture from the air, it quickly loses its crisp texture. Quality begins deteriorating, and spoilage speeds up dramatically. One useful trick is dividing it into smaller sealed portions and adding desiccant packs to help maintain long-term freshness. But the biggest mistake people make with seaweed is not forgetting to buy it. The real mistake is buying it and never learning how to use it. Many people are unfamiliar with the taste. They do not know how to include it in meals, so it simply sits untouched until it expires. Then, when conditions become difficult, they ignore one of the most useful foods they already have. In reality, it is incredibly easy to use. Add it into rice, soups, noodles, or eat small amounts directly. Even simple additions can provide nutrients your body may quietly be missing. And the cost is surprisingly low compared to the long-term value it provides. You do not need massive amounts stored away. But without foods like this, the body slowly pays a price that most people cannot immediately see. When farmland itself becomes part of the problem, foods that do not rely on land gain enormous importance. And in a system that keeps tightening year after year, the things operating outside that system may become the most dependable resources of all. Number 9. Lentils, the crop that keeps surviving when fertilizer becomes too expensive. Most people do not think much about lentils while meat is still affordable and easy to buy every week. But that changes quickly once food systems start tightening. By 2026, rising fertilizer costs are no longer affecting only crops in the field. The pressure spreads into livestock production as well. Feed ingredients like corn and soybeans become more expensive, which pushes up the cost of raising animals. Farmers begin reducing herd sizes because maintaining them becomes too costly. At first, the change feels small. Supermarkets are still open. Shelves are still stocked. But prices keep climbing. Meat portions become smaller. Discounts disappear. Then eventually, one day, you realize something important. The food you used to buy every single week is no longer part of your normal routine. That is how most real crises begin. Not with total shortages overnight, but with the slow loss of things people once considered reliable. And while many crops become harder to grow because they depend heavily on fertilizer, lentils operate differently. As legumes, they naturally fix nitrogen from the air, which means they require far less chemical fertilizer than many other crops. That becomes incredibly important when agricultural input costs rise. Farmers do not abandon all crops equally during difficult times. They prioritize what can continue producing with the lowest dependence on expensive resources. And because of that, lentils are often among the foods that remain available, even as the system becomes strained. I once heard someone put it very simply: I'm not starving. I just don't buy meat every week anymore like I used to. That sentence explains more than most people realize. You are still eating. Your stomach still feels full. Life continues. But quietly, your diet starts changing in ways your body eventually notices. And that is the moment lentils stop being just a side dish and start becoming a primary source of protein. This is what many people fail to understand. Carbohydrates help satisfy hunger, but protein is what helps sustain the body over time. You can survive temporarily eating mostly carbs, but without enough protein, your recovery weakens, your endurance drops, and your body slowly loses resilience. The decline is gradual. You do not suddenly collapse from one bad meal. Instead, you weaken little by little, almost without noticing it at first. That is why lentils matter so much during prolonged instability. In terms of storage, dry lentils are incredibly reliable. When sealed properly and kept cool and dry, especially in mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, they can remain usable for anywhere from 10 to 25 years. Fresh meat, meanwhile, usually lasts only a few days without refrigeration. And that difference changes everything. Meat is something you must continuously replace. Lentils are something you can store away and forget about until the moment you truly need them. That is not just a difference in shelf life. It is the difference between dependence and preparedness. Of course, lentils are not perfect. One mistake people often make is focusing only on how cheap they are while ignoring the real cost: cooking time, water usage, and energy consumption. Lentils cook faster than many other dried beans, but they still require planning. They still need heat and water. And during a crisis, every cooking session starts mattering. That is why efficiency becomes important. Simple habits like pre-soaking, batch cooking, and using fuel-saving heat sources can dramatically reduce how much energy you spend preparing them. Nutritionally, lentils offer a powerful combination of protein and fiber, helping maintain steady energy levels and creating a longer-lasting feeling of fullness compared to many processed foods. And financially, they remain one of the cheapest protein sources available per gram, which becomes a major advantage when food prices start swinging unpredictably from week to week. This is not something you wait to buy after conditions worsen. It is something you already want stored away before you fully understand how valuable it is. Meat can provide comfort for a few days. Lentils can help carry you through months. Number 8. Iodized salt. The deficiency you never see coming. The most dangerous nutritional problems rarely arrive with obvious warning signs. There is no dramatic moment, no sudden collapse. Instead, it starts quietly. One day you feel slightly more tired than usual. Your focus is not as sharp. Your reactions feel slower. Small tasks take more effort. But life still looks normal on the surface. You continue eating. You continue working. You continue functioning. And that is exactly why this kind of decline is so difficult to detect. During a food crisis, especially when fertilizer prices rise and agricultural production starts tightening, the first thing people lose is often not calories. It is not even the feeling of fullness. What disappears first are the small micronutrients the body depends on every single day to function properly. Iodine is one of the most important of them. It is easy to overlook because you never really see it. It is not something people think about while preparing meals. But iodine plays a critical role inside the body by supporting the thyroid, which helps regulate energy levels, body temperature, heart rate, metabolism, and even mental sharpness. When iodine intake drops, the body does not suddenly shut down. It simply begins operating at a lower level. You keep going, but more slowly, more heavily, less efficiently. And that gradual slowdown is incredibly dangerous because everything still appears mostly normal from the outside. This is where many people make a major mistake during preparation. They assume they already have enough salt stored away. After all, salt is cheap, common, and used every day. But regular salt and iodized salt are not the same thing. Ordinary salt mainly adds flavor. Iodized salt adds function. The real difference is not what your food tastes like afterward. It is how your body performs over time. What makes iodine tricky is that the body only requires tiny amounts each day, measured in micrograms. Such a small quantity seems insignificant. But if that small amount is missing for long enough, the consequences slowly build in ways most people never connect back to nutrition. Not through hunger, not through obvious starvation, but through a steady decline in energy, clarity, recovery, and physical balance. You feel slower, colder, more exhausted, but you cannot quite explain why. That is what makes iodine deficiency so deceptive. From a storage standpoint, iodized salt is one of the easiest preparedness items imaginable. When kept sealed and dry, it can last almost indefinitely. It requires no refrigeration, no electricity, and almost no maintenance. Yet despite being simple to store, it is constantly overlooked. The biggest mistake is usually not forgetting salt entirely. It is storing large amounts of regular salt while ignoring the type that actually provides the iodine your body depends on. Because during a prolonged crisis, you may still have enough food. You may still consume enough calories. But without iodine, your body slowly loses something more important than fullness. It loses its ability to maintain a stable, healthy, normal state. You continue eating every day, but little by little, your body starts slowing down, and you may never realize what is causing it. Number 7. Dried mushrooms. Preserving morale when food becomes repetitive. Most people assume hunger is the first thing that breaks people during a crisis. But often, it is not hunger at all. It is monotony. When every meal starts tasting identical day after day, when there is no aroma, no texture, no flavor variation, eating slowly becomes something you force yourself to do instead of something natural. You may still have enough calories sitting in front of you, but mentally, your desire to eat begins fading. And that is more dangerous than it sounds. In a food crisis, especially one caused by rising fertilizer costs and declining agricultural diversity, the first thing people lose is not necessarily food quantity. What disappears first is variety and enjoyment. Fresh ingredients become limited. Meals become repetitive. The experience of eating starts shrinking down to basic survival. And once that happens, morale begins to erode. That is where dried mushrooms become far more important than most people realize. You do not store them because they are filling. You store them because they help make other foods sustainable to eat over the long term. Unlike many traditional crops, mushrooms can grow on organic waste materials like straw, wood, compost, and agricultural leftovers. They depend far less on chemical fertilizers than many vegetables and grains do, which means they are less vulnerable when farming systems begin tightening. But even that is not their greatest value. The real power of dried mushrooms is flavor. It is one of the least discussed but most important parts of long-term food resilience. A meal can technically contain enough nutrition to keep you alive, but if it tastes bland day after day, people naturally begin eating less without fully noticing it. Appetite declines. Meals become smaller. Motivation weakens. And over time, the body quietly starts falling behind. Dried mushrooms provide umami, that deep, savory flavor that naturally stimulates appetite and makes food feel richer and more satisfying. Even a small handful added to rice, soup, noodles, or beans can completely change how a meal feels. And during a long-term crisis, that is not a luxury. It becomes psychological survival, because the ability to continue eating consistently matters just as much as the food itself. In terms of storage, dried mushrooms are extremely practical. When kept sealed, dry, and protected from moisture, they can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years without refrigeration or complicated storage conditions. All they really need is a stable, dry environment. But the biggest mistake people make is mental, not practical. Most preparedness plans focus entirely on calories, protein, and shelf life while ignoring the emotional side of eating. People prepare enough food to survive physically, but they never prepare for the exhaustion of eating the same bland meals for weeks or months. Eventually, that repetition wears people down, and that is why small ingredients with strong flavor become incredibly valuable. Dried mushrooms cost very little compared to the impact they provide. You do not need huge quantities stored away. But without something to break the monotony, you eventually discover an uncomfortable truth. Human beings do not survive on calories alone. They survive on the ability to keep wanting to eat. And once that desire begins disappearing, everything else slowly starts unraveling with it. Because in the end, survival is not only about having food. It is about being able to continue eating day after day without mentally giving up. Number 6. Chia seeds, helping the body hold on to water when hydration becomes harder to maintain. Most people assume dehydration only happens when there is not enough water available. But that is not always the real problem. Sometimes the issue is not how much water you drink. It is how little your body is able to retain. You can drink water constantly throughout the day, even more than usual, and still end up feeling drained a few hours later. Your energy fades, concentration weakens, and your body feels sluggish again. Not because you failed to drink enough, but because the water moves through your system too quickly for your body to fully benefit from it. That is what makes this kind of dehydration so dangerous. It is subtle. You are not severely thirsty. You are not collapsing from heat exhaustion. On the surface, everything appears normal, but underneath, your body is slowly operating at a lower level because it cannot maintain stable hydration. And in diets built mostly around dry foods, with very little fresh produce or water-rich ingredients, this problem appears faster than most people expect. You keep drinking water, but each glass only solves the issue temporarily. A short time later, you feel depleted again and need more. In a situation where water supplies may become limited, inconsistent, or difficult to access, constantly compensating by drinking larger amounts is not always practical. That is where chia seeds become useful. They do not solve hydration by magically creating more water. Instead, they help the body use water more effectively. When chia seeds absorb liquid, they form a gel-like texture inside the digestive system. That slows the absorption process and helps the body retain hydration for a longer period of time. Which means the same amount of water can support your body more efficiently. And that is the part many people overlook. The goal is not always to drink more. Sometimes the goal is to lose less. In terms of storage, chia seeds are extremely reliable. When kept sealed, dry, and protected from heat and light, they can remain stable for roughly 4 to 5 years without refrigeration. Moisture is the main thing that must be avoided, since exposure can reduce freshness and shorten storage life over time. The most common mistake people make is believing hydration is only about volume. They think if they simply force themselves to drink more water, the problem is solved. But if the body cannot retain hydration efficiently, you can remain in a mild but constant state of deficiency no matter how often you drink. Nutritionally, chia seeds also provide omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, and digestive support. But surprisingly, those are not even their most important advantage in a long-term crisis situation. Their real value lies in stability. They help the body function more consistently using the resources already available. Because sometimes the problem is not a complete lack of water. Sometimes the real problem is the body's inability to hold on to it long enough. Number 5. Gelatin, protecting the body's ability to recover. At first, nothing feels wrong. One day passes, then another, then a full week. You are still functioning, still eating, still moving through daily life. But somewhere around the third week, subtle changes begin appearing. Your body no longer bounces back the way it used to. Small aches linger longer. Fatigue takes more time to disappear. Recovery slows down. Not necessarily because you're eating too little, but because your body is no longer getting enough of the materials it needs to repair itself properly. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings during a food crisis. Most people focus entirely on calories. Their goal is simply to avoid hunger. And yes, calories matter. But the body needs more than fuel alone. It also needs building material. Without that, the system slowly starts wearing down faster than it can rebuild. Collagen is one of the key components involved in that process. In fact, collagen makes up roughly 25 to 30% of the body's total protein content. It plays a major role in joints, connective tissues, skin, tendons, and even parts of the digestive system, all areas constantly placed under stress every single day. When collagen intake becomes insufficient, the body does not suddenly fail. It adapts. But it adapts by operating less efficiently. You do not wake up one morning unable to function. Instead, everything begins feeling slightly heavier. Recovery takes a little longer. Minor discomforts last a little more each week. And that is how real physical decline often begins. Quietly, gradually, accumulating over time until the body no longer maintains itself the way it once could. Gelatin offers a simple way to help replace part of what may be missing. It does not require complicated preparation or large quantities. Even small amounts used consistently can support the body over the long term. And because gelatin comes in a dry, shelf-stable form, it stores extremely well. When sealed properly and protected from moisture, it can remain usable for many years, often well over a decade. No refrigeration, no electricity, very little maintenance. But the biggest mistake people make is assuming that if they still have energy, everything must be fine. That is not how the body works. Energy and recovery are not the same thing. You can continue working. You can continue eating enough calories. You can continue pushing forward every day while your body slowly loses its ability to repair the damage created by stress, labor, poor sleep, or repetitive strain. And over long periods of hardship, that difference becomes critical. What determines whether someone holds up over time is often not raw strength. It is recovery. How quickly the body can repair itself. How effectively it can restore what daily life keeps wearing down. Without recovery, stability slowly disappears. You do not collapse all at once. You decline gradually, one day at a time, until eventually your body can no longer maintain the pace it once could. Number 4. Ghee. Sustaining warmth and energy when the body quietly burns more than expected. There are days when you eat what feels like enough food, yet you still end up feeling drained. It is not necessarily because you are lacking meals. It is because your body is constantly spending energy in the background, even when you are doing nothing active. Every moment, your body is working. Maintaining heartbeat, regulating temperature, supporting breathing, and running internal systems all require continuous energy. An average adult uses roughly 1,500 to 2,000 kilocalories per day just to stay alive, without any additional activity. And when conditions become cold or stressful, that demand can rise by another 10 to 20% without you even realizing it. The issue is often not how much food you consume. It is the energy concentration of that food. Fat provides about 9 kilocalories per gram, which is nearly double the energy density of carbohydrates or protein. This means you can consume smaller amounts of fat while still meeting your energy needs, which becomes extremely important when food availability is limited. Ghee is a concentrated form of fat, created by removing water and milk solids from butter. That process makes it more stable and far less prone to spoilage, which is why it does not require refrigeration. When stored properly in a sealed container and kept away from heat and light, ghee can last anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Fresh butter, by comparison, only lasts a short time before it spoils. But the real importance of ghee is not just its shelf life. It is how efficiently the body can turn it into usable energy. When diets become repetitive or limited, nutrient absorption can gradually decline. In those situations, ghee also plays another role beyond calories. It helps the body absorb fat-soluble vitamins such as A, D, E, and K, which are often harder to obtain during periods of restricted food variety. One common mistake is avoiding fat out of general health concerns. But in a shortage scenario, the priority shifts. It is no longer about minimizing fat. It is about ensuring the body has enough usable energy to function properly. You might still be eating enough in terms of volume, but if the food is not energy-dense, your body can still end up in a deficit. And that is when the signs appear slowly. More fatigue, slower movement, a reduced ability to keep up with daily demands. Not hunger, exactly, just a constant feeling of being drained, even when you have eaten.